The sun was dying, and with it, 4 billion souls ambassador. Talonvris stood at the observation deck of her transport ship and watched her homeworld grow smaller behind her. The golden fields of Kethvara, where her children had learned to walk. The silver rivers that sang ancient songs through mountain valleys. The great cities built by generations of her people who had known nothing but peace in 18 months. All of it would burn. The scientists had tried to explain it in simple terms. A rogue stellar fragment had passed too close to their sun 3 years ago. The gravitational disruption had created a cascade effect deep within the star's core. Now, their sun was building toward a catastrophic release of energy. Solar flares would strip away the atmosphere. Radiation would poison the soil. The oceans would boil into steam and drift away into the cold void of space. The Kethari had no fleet capable of evacuation. They had never needed warships or colony vessels for 10,000 years. They had been farmers and artists and philosophers. They had believed the universe was kind. Talonvris was about to learn otherwise. The great chamber of the Galactic Concord stretched before her like a cathedral built for giants. 12 towering platforms rose in a circle, each one holding the representatives of an empire that spanned hundreds of star systems. These were the powers that shaped galactic civilization, the Dominion with their endless armies, the Syndicate with their trade networks that touched every inhabited world, the Ascendancy with their ancient wisdom and technologies beyond comprehension, and at the center, on a platform so small it seemed almost invisible, stood Talonvris. She had practiced her speech for weeks. She had memorized statistics and prepared emotional appeals and gathered every argument she could imagine. But as she looked up at those 12 platforms, at the faces that regarded her with polite disinterest, she felt her words turn to ash in her mouth. She spoke anyway. "My people are going to die," she began, her voice barely steady. 4 billion lives. 10,000 years of culture and history and art. Children who have not yet spoken their first words. Elders who carry the memories of generations. All of them will be gone in 18 months unless someone helps us. The Dominion representative leaned forward. His scales caught the light as he moved, and his eyes held the cold patience of a predator who had never known hunger. The Dominion sympathizes with your situation, Ambassador. However, our fleet is currently engaged in securing our border territories. We cannot spare the vessels for a humanitarian mission of this scale. We are not asking you to fight, Talonvris said quickly, only to carry our people to safety. We will go anywhere. We will accept any conditions. Please. The Syndicate representative made a small gesture with her 4 arms, a motion that somehow conveyed both sympathy and dismissal. The Syndicate operates on principles of mutual benefit, Ambassador. Your world possesses no significant mineral resources. Your people have no specialized skills that are not already abundant in the labor markets. I am afraid there is simply no profitable arrangement to be made here. Talonvris felt something crack inside her chest. You are talking about profit while my children face extinction. We are talking about reality. The Syndicate representative replied without emotion, one by one. The other empires offered their refusals. The collective could not risk exposing their citizens to potential biological contamination. The Federation was bound by treaties that prohibited intervention in non-member systems. The Assembly required a unanimous vote that would take years to organize. When Talonvris turned to the Ascendancy platform, she felt a last flicker of hope. The Ascendancy were the oldest civilization in known space. They had technologies that seemed like magic to younger species. Surely, they would help. The Ascendancy representative was ancient beyond measure. Her form flickered between states of matter as she spoke, and her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ambassador Talonvris, she said gently, the universe is vast and old, and many species have risen and fallen since the first stars ignited. Your people have lived well. You have created beauty and meaning during your time among the stars. Perhaps it is time to accept your cosmic fate with dignity." The chamber fell silent. Talonvris stared at the ancient being, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. "You want us to accept our deaths. You want 4 billion people to simply lie down and wait to burn. All things end, Ambassador. There is no shame in accepting what cannot be changed." The session concluded shortly after. The representatives departed to their private quarters, already forgetting the small ambassador who had come begging for salvation. Within an hour, the great chamber was empty except for Talonvris, who had not moved from her platform. She wept then, alone in that vast space built for giants who had no hearts high above. In an observation gallery reserved for minor diplomatic staff, a young human sat watching. His name was James Chun, and he was supposed to be cataloging trade agreements for a report that no one would ever read. Instead, he had watched an entire civilization be sentenced to death by indifference. James had been stationed at the be sentenced to death by indifference. James had been stationed at the Dejerispian Concord for 3 years. He had seen the empires at work, the endless games of power and influence that decided the fates of billions. He had learned to be cynical about galactic politics, but watching Talonvris weep, something old and stubborn woke up inside him. He pulled out his communication device and composed a message. It was unauthorized. It would probably end his career. He sent it anyway. The message traveled across 1,000 light years to reach Earth, where it landed on the desk of Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Human Fleet. She read it 3 times, then called an emergency meeting of the High Command. "There are 4 billion people about to die," she told them. "No one will help them. The Concord has declined involvement," one of her advisors pointed out. "Intervention would violate 17 treaties. Then we violate 17 treaties. Admiral, we do not have the political standing to challenge the empires. We are one of the smallest spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy." Tanaka stood and walked to the window. Outside, the shipyards of Luna stretched across the gray surface of the moon. Humanity had only been among the stars for 200 years. They were newcomers, barely noticed by the ancient powers. "Do you know what my grandmother used to tell me?" Tanaka said quietly. "She said that the measure of a people is not what they do when the world is watching. It is what they do when no one else will act." She turned back to her command staff. "Mobilize every ship we can spare. Colony vessels, cargo haulers. Anything that can carry passengers. We leave in 72 hours. 3 days later, Ambassador Talonvris received a message that would change the galaxy forever. 47 human ships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of her system. They had not been invited. They had not asked permission. And they carried a simple message that made her weep again. Though, this time not from despair. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Human Fleet. We are here to help. Tell us what you need." The human ships were not beautiful by galactic standards. Ambassador Talonvris watched them from her office window as they moved into orbit around Kathvara. Dominion warships were sleek and terrible, built to inspire fear. Syndicate vessels gleamed with wealth and precision engineering. Ascendancy craft seemed to flow like liquid metal, defying physics with casual grace. The human ships looked like they had been assembled from spare parts by people who cared more about function than form. Hull plates of different colors show where repairs had been made over years of hard service. Cargo containers hung from external mounts like fruit from heavy branches. Nothing matched, nothing coordinated, nothing impressed, and yet Talonvris had never seen anything more beautiful in her life. Admiral Tanaka's face appeared on her communication screen. The human woman had gray streaks in her black hair and tired lines around her eyes. But her voice carried an energy that made Tellenvris believe that somehow everything might be all right. Ambassador, we have 47 vessels currently in system. 23 are converted colony ships that can carry approximately 50,000 passengers each. The rest are cargo haulers loaded with prefabricated shelters, atmospheric processors, and enough food supplies to sustain your people during transit. Tellenvris did the mathematics quickly in her head. That is enough to evacuate perhaps 2 million people. Admiral, we have 4 billion. I know, Tanaka said. More ships are coming. We have put out a call to every human world, every mining colony, every cargo company that owns a vessel capable of interstellar travel. This is just the first wave. You cannot possibly have enough ships for 4 billion people. Not yet. But we have 18 months, and humans are very good at building things when we have to be. The communication ended, and Tellenvris sat in silence for a long moment. She did not understand these humans. No one helps strangers, not in this galaxy. There was always a price, always an angle, always a calculation of benefit. What did the humans want in return? She did not have long to wonder before a new crisis demanded her attention. The Dominion had sent a peacekeeping fleet, 12 warships, dropped out of hyperspace and took up positions between the human vessels and Kethvara. They were massive things, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet in half. Their presence turned the evacuation zone into a battlefield waiting to happen. Commander Vethrak of the Dominion transmitted his demands to the entire system. Human vessels, you are in violation of Galactic Concord Resolution 7742, which prohibits unauthorized military presence in sovereign territories. You will withdraw immediately or face the consequences of your illegal action. Tellenvris felt her heart sink. The humans had tried to help, and now they would be forced to leave. The empires would never allow this challenge to their authority, and humanity was far too small to stand against Dominion warships. She expected Admiral Tanaka to negotiate, to apologize, to find some diplomatic way to retreat with dignity. Instead, the human admiral did something that shocked every being in the system. She laughed. Her response was broadcast on all frequencies, so that every Dominion soldier, every Cathari citizen, and every monitoring station in the sector could hear her words. Commander Vethrak, I appreciate you coming all this way to remind me about treaties. Let me remind you of something in return. 3 weeks ago, Ambassador Tellenvris stood before the Galactic Concord and begged for help. She asked 12 empires to save 4 billion innocent lives. Do you know what those empires said? She paused, letting the silence stretch. They said no. They said it was not profitable. They said it was not convenient. They said the Kethari should accept their cosmic fate with dignity. 12 civilizations that call themselves the pillars of galactic society looked at a dying world and decided that helping would cost too much. Her voice hardened. You had your chance to care. You chose not to. We chose differently. If you want to stop us from saving lives, you will have to kill us while we are doing it. And then you will have to explain to the entire galaxy why Dominion warships open fire on unarmed colony vessels carrying refugees. Commander Vethrak's response came after a long pause. His voice was cold but uncertain. You are risking war, Admiral. Your species cannot survive a conflict with the Dominion. Maybe not, Tanaka admitted. But here is the thing about humans, Commander. We are very bad at doing nothing when people are suffering. It is a flaw, some would say. We see someone in trouble and we have to help. Even when it is stupid, even when it is dangerous, even when the math says we should walk away. That is not strength. Admiral, that is foolishness. Perhaps. But my grandmother used to say that the universe has plenty of people who are wise enough to do nothing. What it needs more of are fools who are brave enough to do something. The standoff held for 6 hours. During that time, Talonverse watched the human ships continue their work as if 12 Dominion warships were not pointing weapons at them. Shuttles descended to the surface carrying engineers and equipment. Human crews worked with Kethari volunteers to set up evacuation centers. The first groups of refugees began boarding transports. Commander Vethrek faced an impossible choice. If he opened fire, he would be massacring humanitarian workers in front of the entire galaxy. The other empires might not care about the Kethari, but they would not tolerate the Dominion claiming authority over neutral space through violence if he withdrew. The Dominion would look weak in the end. He chose the path that all bullies choose when their bluff is called. He declared that the Dominion would be monitoring the situation closely and withdrew his fleet to the edge of the system as the warships retreated. Admiral Tanaka sent one final message to Commander Vethrek. "Thank you for your understanding, Commander. I hope we can meet again under better circumstances." Talonverse contacted the human admiral as soon as the Dominion ships had gone. "Admiral Tanaka, I must ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "Of course, Ambassador. Why are you doing this? What do the humans want from us? We have nothing to offer. No resources, no strategic value, no way to repay what you are giving us. Why would you risk war with the Dominion for strangers?" Tanaka was quiet for a moment before she answered. "Ambassador, about 200 years ago, my ancestors lived on an island nation on Earth called Japan. There was a great disaster. An earthquake that caused massive waves to destroy coastal cities. Thousands of people were trapped, injured, dying. What happened? Help came from all over the world, from nations that had been enemies just decades before. People sent aid, ships and planes and doctors and supplies. They did not ask what Japan could give them in return. They did not calculate the profit. They simply saw people suffering and decided to help." Tanaka's eyes met Talonverse through the screen. "That is who humans are, Ambassador. We are the people who show up, not because it is smart, not because it is profitable, but because it is right. Your people are in trouble. We are here. That is all the reason we need." Talonverse felt tears forming in her eyes again. "I do not know how to thank you. You do not have to thank us. Just help us save your people. We have a lot of work to do." Behind the human line, the evacuation continued. Ships descended and rose again, carrying thousands of Kethari towards safety with each trip. The work was slow and the timeline was impossible. But for the first time since the scientists had delivered their terrible news, Ambassador Talonverse allowed herself to hope. 6 months into the evacuation, the sun began to die faster. The scientists delivered the news with trembling voices. The stellar instability had accelerated beyond their worst predictions. Instead of 18 months, they now had perhaps 8. The evacuation that was already impossible had become even more, so Admiral Tanaka gathered her senior staff in the command center of the flagship Endeavor. The faces around her showed exhaustion, determination, and fear in equal measure. They had been working without rest for half a year, and they had saved 12 billion lives, but 28 billion people were still on the planet below. "We cannot move fast enough," Captain Sarah Williams said quietly. "Even with every ship we have, even running double shifts, we will be lucky to save another billion before the flares begin. Then we need more time." Tanaka replied, "The sun does not negotiate." Admiral, a young engineer named Dmitry Volkov, spoke up from the back of the room. He was a quiet man who rarely attended command meetings, but his eyes held an intensity that made everyone stop and listen. "There might be a way," he said. "It is insane, and it will probably not work. But there might be a way." He walked to the central display and pulled up a diagram of the Kethari sun. "The problem is energy buildup in the stellar core. The pressure is increasing faster than the star can release it naturally. When it reaches critical levels, The star will release all that energy at once in a massive coronal ejection that will strip the planet bare. We know this already, Williams said impatiently. What if we help the star release that pressure early? In a controlled direction away from the planet, the room fell silent. You are talking about stellar engineering, Tanaka said slowly. No one has ever done that successfully. No one has ever tried with antimatter charges, detonated in a precise sequence along the stellar surface. The explosions would create a weak point in the magnetic field, allowing the energy to vent in a controlled burst, like lancing a wound to release pressure before infection spreads. The chief science officer shook his head. The radiation levels near the corona would be lethal. Any ship that got close enough to deliver those charges would be destroyed. I know, Volkov said quietly. The room understood what he was not saying. Someone would have to fly those ships. Someone would have to die. Tanaka studied the young engineer's face. You have already done the calculations. You already know what this would require. 12 ships carrying antimatter warheads, positioned at precise coordinates around the star. The detonation sequence would need to be perfectly timed. Any error would make things worse instead of better. And yes, the radiation exposure would be fatal to all crew members within hours of the mission. And if it works, we buy the Cathari 2 more years. Enough time to complete the evacuation. Captain Williams stood abruptly. We cannot ask people to do this. We cannot order crews to fly suicide missions. You would not have to order anyone, Volkov said. I have already spoken to others. There are enough volunteers. The call went out across the human fleet. 12 ships were needed for a mission with no possibility of survival. Within 1 hour, 43 crews had volunteered. Admiral Tanaka chose the 12 with the most experienced pilots and the fewest family members waiting back home. Even so, she knew she was sending 144 people to their deaths. She met with each crew personally before the mission. She memorized their names and faces and stories. She would carry them with her for the rest of her life. Captain Dmitry Volkov would lead the mission aboard the ship Prometheus. Before he departed, he asked to send one final message back to Earth. My grandmother survived the siege of Leningrad, he said, his face calm and his voice steady. 900 days of starvation and bombing and cold that killed more than 1 million people. She used to tell me stories about how strangers shared their last bread with each other, how people carried children through the snow when they barely had strength to walk themselves. He paused and looked directly into the camera. She taught me that you do not abandon people in the cold. That is why I am here. That is why all of us are here. We are not heroes. We are just people who could not look away. His final words before the transmission ended would be remembered for centuries. See you on the other side. The 12 ships flew toward the sun. Ambassador Tellenvris watched from the observation deck of the Endeavour as the human vessels grew smaller and smaller against the blazing light. Around her, human crew members stood in silence, some weeping openly, others holding hands with their companions. Why? She asked Admiral Tanaka, who stood beside her. Why would they do this? They have families. They have lives waiting for them back home. Why would they throw all of that away for people they have never met? Tanaka did not answer for a long moment. I have been asking myself the same question since this mission began. I think the answer is that some humans cannot see suffering without trying to stop it. Even when the cost is everything, even when the odds are impossible, they have to try. It seems like madness. Maybe it is, or maybe it is the best part of us. The part that refuses to accept that some people are worth less than others just because they are far away or different or strangers. The ships reached their positions around the sun. The antimatter charges were deployed with perfect precision. Captain Volkov's voice came through the communication system one final time. All charges in position. Detonation in 60 seconds, Admiral. It has been an honor. "The honor is ours, Captain. All of ours." The countdown reached 012 points of light flashed against the surface of the dying star. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a massive stream of fire erupted from the far side of the sun, venting into space away from the planet. Energy that would have destroyed a world instead scattered harmlessly into the void. It worked, but the price was terrible. 8 of the 12 ships were destroyed instantly by the shockwave. The remaining 4 survived long enough to confirm the success of the mission before radiation claimed their crews one by one within 3 days. All 144 volunteers were dead. The Cathari sun stabilized. It would not remain stable forever. But the scientists confirmed that the evacuation now had 2 additional years. Enough time to save everyone. The Galactic Concorde watched in stunned silence as the news spread across the galaxy. Humans had done something no species had ever attempted. They had reached into a star and bent it to their will. And they had paid for that miracle with their lives. The Ascendancy representative who had advised the Cathari to accept their cosmic fate was the first to break the silence. "This changes nothing," she said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "The humans have merely delayed the inevitable." But everyone who heard her knew she was wrong. Something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the way the galaxy understood humanity. These were not the weak newcomers the empires had dismissed. These were people who would fly into a star to save strangers, and that made them dangerous in a way no weapon could match on Cathvara. The evacuation continued with renewed hope. Every ship that lifted off carried people who were alive because humans had died for them. Tellenvris made sure that every Cathari knew the names of the 144 who had given everything. She would build them a monument on their new world. 12 pillars of light to honor the 12 ships. 144 flames that would never go out. But that was for later. For now, there was work to do. The humans had bought them time with blood and fire. The Cathari would not waste a single moment of it. The last transport lifted off from Cathvara on a morning. That would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Ambassador Tellenvris stood at the viewport and watched her homeworld fall away for the final time. The golden fields had turned brown from radiation damage. The silver rivers ran sluggish with contaminated water. The great cities stood empty, their windows dark, their streets silent. 4 billion people had lived on that world. Now there were none, but they were alive, all of them, scattered across convoy ships, heading toward a new home that human engineers had spent 18 months preparing. A world on the outer rim where Cathari children would grow up under different stars. The evacuation had taken everything the humans had. Ships that should have been retired were pushed past their limits. Crews worked double and triple shifts for months on end. Human colonies sent supplies they could barely spare. Private citizens donated money they needed for their own families, and at the end, not a single Cathari life was lost. Tellenvris had a speech to give. The Galactic Concorde had agreed to a special session, and for the first time in history, a representative of the Cathari would address the assembly not as a supplicant begging for help, but as an equal demanding to be heard. She traveled to the great chamber with Admiral Tanaka at her side. The human woman looked older than she had 2 years ago. The weight of 144 deaths showed in the lines around her eyes and the gray that had spread through her hair. "Are you nervous?" Tanaka asked as they approached the chamber doors. "Terrified," Tellenvris admitted. "I am about to tell the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy that they are failures." "Good. They need to hear it." The doors opened, and Tellenvris walked into the chamber that had witnessed her humiliation 2 years before. The 12 platforms still towered above the speaker's position. The representatives of the great empires still looked down with their ancient arrogance. But something was different. The Cathari platform was not empty anymore. Talonvris climbed to her position and found Admiral Tanaka standing beside her. Two small figures against the giants who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Distinguished representatives of the Galactic Concord, Talonvris began, her voice steady despite her pounding hearts. 2 years ago, I stood in this chamber and begged for your help. My world was dying. My people faced extinction. I asked 12 empires to show mercy. She paused and looked at each platform in turn. You refused. The Dominion could not spare ships. The Syndicate saw no profit. The Ascendancy suggested we accept our deaths with dignity. 12 civilizations that call themselves the pillars of galactic society looked at 4 billion lives and decided they were not worth saving. The chamber was utterly silent, and then the humans came. Talonvris gestured to Tanaka. This woman leads a species that has only been among the stars for 200 years. They have no great fleet. They have no vast empire. They have nothing that should make them significant by your standards. But when my people were dying, they came. They sent every ship they could find. They worked without rest for 18 months. They faced down Dominion warships with nothing but determination and the refusal to abandon strangers. Her voice grew stronger. And when our sun began to fail faster than we could evacuate, 12 human ships flew into its corona to buy us more time. 144 humans died to save a species they had never met. She let that sink in before continuing. You call yourselves civilized. You measure advancement in weapons and territory and wealth. But when my people faced extinction, your civilization was worthless. The humans came with less than you have. They spent more than you would. They bled for us. They died for us. Talonvris raised her head and spoke the words she had waited 2 years to say. And they asked for nothing in return. The Dominion representative attempted to respond. The Dominion recognizes the humanitarian efforts of the human species, however. This emotional display does not change the fundamental realities of galactic politics. You are wrong, Talonvris replied. It changes everything. For 2 years the galaxy has watched. Smaller species have seen how the great empires respond to crisis. They have seen your calculations and your indifference. They have also seen what humans will do for strangers. She smiled. And there was no warmth in it. Do you think they have forgotten? Do you think the Velthari and the Mechana and the Thousand Worlds have not noticed who came to help and who turned away? Your empires are built on the belief that power comes from fear. The humans have shown that there is another kind of power, one that comes from standing beside others instead of above them. Admiral Tanaka stepped forward. Representatives of the Concord, humanity does not seek to challenge your authority. We do not want your territories or your resources. We simply refuse to live in a galaxy where people die because helping them is inconvenient. If that makes us your enemy, so be it, but we will not change who we are. The session ended without resolution. The empires retreated to their private councils to discuss what had happened. Some were angry. Some were frightened. A few were quietly beginning to reconsider everything they thought they knew about power and civilization. 3 weeks later, the Dominion tested human resolve. A blockade fleet surrounded the human colony of New Singapore. 200 warships against a world of 12 million people. Commander Vethrak, the same officer who had confronted Admiral Tanaka at Kethvara, delivered an ultimatum. The humans would submit to Dominion oversight of their humanitarian operations or face the consequences. Tanaka received the message on the bridge of the Endeavor. She read it twice, then began to laugh. Signal all human worlds, she said. Tell them what is happening. Tell them we need ships at New Singapore, whatever they can send. As fast as they can send it. Her first officer looked uncertain. Admiral, the Dominion has 200 warships. We have perhaps 40 military vessels in the entire fleet. I did not say military vessels. I said ships. Within 1 week, 300 vessels had arrived at New Singapore. They were not warships. They were cargo haulers and mining rigs and passenger transports. They were old freighters held together with patches and prayers. They were private yachts whose owners had crossed half the galaxy to stand with their own kind. Every single one of them was armed with whatever weapons their crews could find or build. Commander Vethrak had expected a military response. Instead, he faced something he did not understand. Ordinary humans flying ordinary ships, coming to defend strangers, because that was what humans did. Tanaka sent him one final message. We do not have an empire. Commander, we have something better. We have each other. And we do not abandon our own. The standoff lasted for 3 days. In the end, the Dominion withdrew again. They could have won the battle easily. But winning would have cost them something more valuable than ships. It would have proven to the galaxy that the empires destroyed anyone who dared to help others. The Cathari were not the only ones paying attention. The smaller species, the ones the empires had ignored or exploited for centuries, had watched everything. They had seen the great powers turn away from a dying world. They had seen humans fly into a star to save strangers. They had seen 300 civilian ships face down a Dominion armada, and they were beginning to ask themselves a question that the empires had never wanted them to ask. What if there was another way to live in this galaxy? The foundation of a new era was being laid, not with treaties or conquests, but with acts of simple courage that reminded the universe what civilization was supposed to mean. 10 years had passed as the last transport lifted off from Cathvara. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Concorde still existed, its 12 platforms still towering above the assembly chamber, its representatives still speaking with the arrogance of ancient power. But their authority had cracked, and something new was growing in the spaces between empires. They called it the Open Hand Coalition. It had started small. Just a few species who had been abandoned or ignored by the great powers. They had watched what the humans did for the Cathari and decided they wanted to be part of something different. Within 5 years, the coalition had grown to include 47 species. Within 10 years, that number had tripled. The coalition was not an empire. It had no central government, no conquering fleets, no tribute systems. Instead, it was a network of mutual aid and shared defense. When one member faced crisis, the others responded. When resources were needed, they were shared. When danger threatened, ships from a dozen worlds would arrive to stand together. The humans were at the heart of it, not as rulers, but as examples on New Cathvara, the world that humans had helped terraform. The capital city had grown into something beautiful. Cathari architecture blended with human design, creating streets that flowed like rivers and buildings that reached toward unfamiliar stars. At the city center stood a memorial that had become the most visited site in the outer rim. 12 pillars of light rose toward the heavens, each one representing a ship that had flown into the corona of a dying star. Around the pillars, 144 flames burned eternally, never flickering, never dimming. The names of the dead were carved in stone at the base, in both human standard and Cathari script. Human and Cathari children played in the shadow of the memorial, learning each other's languages, sharing games that mixed traditions from two worlds. They had grown up together, these children, and they did not see each other as alien. They saw each other as family. Ambassador Tellenverse, now elderly and slow, still visited the memorial every morning. Her golden fur had faded to silver, and she needed assistance to walk, but her mind remained sharp. She had become something between a hero and a saint to her people, the one who had refused to accept extinction on this particular morning. She was not alone. A young Dominion diplomat named Kethfol had traveled across the galaxy to speak with her. He was unusual for his kind, questioning things that most Dominion citizens accepted without thought. The rise of the coalition had confused and frightened the empires, and some of their younger members wanted to understand what was happening. "Ambassador Telengris," he said, bowing in the formal style of his people, "I have come to ask a question that my superiors refuse to answer. How did the humans become so influential so quickly? They have no great fleet, no vast territory, no ancient wisdom. By every measure of power that matters, they should be insignificant." Telengris smiled and gestured for him to sit beside her on a bench facing the memorial. "You are measuring power incorrectly," she said. "Your empires see the galaxy as something to be owned, resources to be extracted, territories to be controlled, species to be dominated. The humans see it differently." "How so?" "They see it as something to be shared." Kethful looked at the 12 pillars of light. 144 of them died for your people. I have read the reports. I know what they did. But I do not understand why. There was no strategic value in saving the Kethari. No resources, no military advantage, no political gain. That is correct. Then why did they do it? Telengris was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children run past, their laughter mixing human and Kethari words. When I asked Admiral Tanaka that question 10 years ago, she told me a story about her ancestors, about a disaster on Earth, and how strangers from around the world came to help without asking for anything in return. She said that was who humans are. The people who show up, not because it is profitable, not because it is wise, but because they cannot watch suffering without trying to stop it. Kethful shook his head slowly. The Dominion would call that weakness, an inefficient use of resources that provides no return. And yet here we are, Telengris replied. The coalition grows stronger every year. Species that once feared each other now stand together. Worlds that the empires abandoned have found new prosperity through cooperation. Your Dominion, with all its warships and conquered territories, watches its influence fade while humans with patched-together freighters build something that will outlast every empire in the galaxy. What will outlast empires? Trust. Young diplomat, the humans taught us that when you help others without demanding payment, they remember. When you sacrifice for strangers, you create bonds stronger than any treaty. The coalition exists because 47 species watched humans fly into a star to save people they had never met. And they decided they wanted to be part of that kind of civilization. They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames flicker around the memorial. Then a message arrived that changed everything again. A transmission had been intercepted from deep space, far beyond the boundaries of known civilization. It was fragmented and weak, clearly sent across vast distances with primitive equipment. But the meaning was unmistakable. Another species was dying. A disaster had struck their homeworld, and they had heard rumors of a civilization that helped strangers. They were sending a plea into the void, hoping that the stories were true. The message reached human command within hours. Admiral Yuki Tanaka had retired years ago, but her great-granddaughter, Captain Mai Tanaka, now commanded her own vessel. She read the transmission on the bridge of the starship Prometheus II, named in honor of the ship that had led the solar mission a decade before. Her first officer looked at the navigation data and shook his head. Captain, this signal comes from beyond explored space. We do not know what is out there. We do not know if we can help. We do not even know if this is real. It is real, May said quietly. Someone is asking for help. We should consult with Coalition Command. Run analysis on the signal. Prepare a proper expedition. How long would that take? Weeks? Perhaps months. May thought about her great-grandmother, about the stories she had heard growing up, about a woman who had mobilized a fleet in 72 hours to save strangers because waiting would have meant lives lost. No, she said. We go now. Send word to Coalition Command. Tell them where we are heading, but we do not wait for permission. Someone needs us. She gave the order that her ancestor had given a generation before. Set course. We have work to do. The Prometheus II turned toward the unknown, toward a distant species that had reached out across the void with nothing but hope. Other coalition ships would follow, Cathari human and a dozen other species. All answering the same call. Ambassador Talonvris heard the news that evening. She smiled and looked up at the 12 pillars of light that had burned above her city for 10 years. You started something, she whispered to the flames. Something that will never stop. Far away, Captain Mai Tanaka stood at the viewport of her ship and watched the stars streak past. Somewhere ahead, strangers were waiting, not knowing if help would come, not knowing if anyone had heard their cry. But help was coming, because that was what humans did. And once again, when every empire turned away, the humans answered with fire from the stars. The story had not ended, and had only just begun.